The person who was renting out the Airbnb, he said to me, "Oh yeah, the moment you start understanding politics is the moment you arrived in Brazil." And I was like, well, I'm not interested in politics, so I probably will never arrive then, that's cool. But then I remember a few months later, they changed government along with the visa laws. And I was like, shit, I had arrived, he was right. E aí, beleza, bem-vindo, what's up, what's good, and welcome to the Brazilian podcast, the How to Live in Brazil podcast, the How to unofficially named How to Live in Brazil podcast. I'm your host, Stephen, from West London, Ladbroke Grove, reporting here live from Brazil. And this episode is all about Porque, gente, fazendo, isso. Why the fuck are we doing this? So, the Brazilian podcast, our communidade, is all about a top survivor's guide, an insight, an authentic, honest look at life here in Brazil from the perspective of non-natives, Brazilian natives, South Americans, people basically, people who have been here, people who want to come here, people who live here, and people who are from here. And today we're talking about why are we doing this? See, for me, I always wanted something like this when I first got here. I always found it interesting that the few people that I knew from my own communidade, from my own place where I grew up, my own community, there were very few of us who had been out here. Not to say that I was one of the first people to travel to South America or anything crazy like that. Just from the circle of friends that I had, this was always a plan of mine, a dream of mine to move out here. But it wasn't for a lot of my peers. A lot of my peers were more interested in going to the United States or the Caribbean or Africa rather than South America and Brazil. This might have been because of stigma, because of reputation, stereotypes that they may have picked up on. But my point is, when I first tried to get out here, I had to ask some pretty silly questions. I felt at the time were silly questions just because I generally had no clue. I didn't have a lot of access when it came to just, is this a place that I would actually be all right? Am I actually going to be safe here? Is this a place that I'm actually going to enjoy? Am I going to be just lost, not speaking the language and stuff like that? Or do I need to, go ham, go hard and really what's the word? Again, Portuguese is taking over the English. Immerse myself, there you go. Would I have to immerse myself in the Brazilian culture before getting out here and in Portuguese? So again, talking about why it was important to make this podcast and have this communidade was because I didn't know how to find certain answers, and I would ask. I have maybe two friends that helped me out when it came to being here, and I felt like I was lucky, to be honest, because I was close with one and the other one was a friend of another, so it was like, okay, there's not too many degrees of separation in terms of getting information from people who have been to Brazil, who can tell me, do this, do that, be careful about here, make sure you try this, make sure you visit this place, and those sort of tips. But it just wasn't a lot of us, and I had already started studying Portuguese. It's been a dream of mine to live here since very, very young. I think about 15, if not younger. So, learning Portuguese and stuff like that, I had already had that in mind. I had already started doing that before I came out here the first time. So my questions were not based on how to say things or anything like that. It was just on like where to go and, how I can find certain things, how I can find food, how I could find weed, if I smoked at the time, I can't remember. It was just, these kind of things, which is important, making sure you know the right phrases and whatnot. And a friend of mine, I remember when he first came to Brazil, we met and he was on holiday. He's from the States, and he would ask the sort of basic questions that I was asking. At that time, I'd been here for a while, so I was just like, yeah, man, you just got to do this, you just got to do that, it's no big deal. And I felt like, geez, like this should be like common knowledge. Like, how is it not common knowledge? The thing about Brazil is most things that are common knowledge you learn on the job, you learn through osmosis, you learn through word of mouth whilst being there. They don't really have this sort of like pamphlet of here's what you need to do in order to get settled here, or here's what you need to do in order to go on holiday. You know, the people are incredibly friendly and they'll always try their best to help you. But sometimes, especially as a foreigner anyway, you might have missed a few things that you might realize are important when you get there. There might be a few things that you can't see or have access to until you get there, until you need it. You know, it could even be things like healthcare. If you don't have a great plan or a plan that maps things out for you specifically, you can actually knock up some really large bills like that as well. So again, speaking about this friend of mine, he came to visit a few times and then eventually he ended up moving out here to live. And it was when he moved out here to live, he started coming with these new bunch of questions. And he'd already been here like 5 or 6 times. But this time, because he wasn't visiting, because he wasn't staying for a month or a few months, it was like permanent, you know. He just had so many different questions. I was like, dude, come on, surely you should know all of this. And he was asking me this stuff. And because I'd already lived out here, because I'd already been living out here, he was like, bro, you're sitting on a gold mine of information here that you could really just, help me out with. And I was like, yeah, okay, shit, I didn't even realize. And I started like telling him stuff and he'd be like, wow, yeah. And a lot of things that I realized, when it wasn't through osmosis, it was from people telling me, hey, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. If you speak the language, doesn't mean you're going to be fluent. And if you speak the language, doesn't mean you're going to be an expert. And sometimes you do need to hear things in your native tongue, whether it be English or French or wherever you're from originally. You need to hear it just so that you know that you've got that information down properly. I speak Portuguese, but doesn't mean that I understand every slang that they use. I like to think that I do, but I really don't, and it shows sometimes, and you'll see. But yeah, moving out here is completely different to being here on holiday, and for these reasons, it's important to, get as much information as you possibly can. In drips and drabs, not all at once, depending on what your motives is. And this is one of the reasons why I felt like this communidade, the Brazilian podcast, is a great way, because it might not be everything that you're interested in. If we're talking about moving in one day, and the next episode, another podcast, we could be talking and having a conversation about football. You might not have any interest in football or in sport in Brazil. But, it doesn't mean that you have to take part in every single one. But part of the communidade is to help build this amazing Bible, this amazing guide that can really, really just help us in the long run. Another reason why this communidade, this Brazilian podcast, is important is because sometimes you learn things that you might not even realize are important at the time, and then later on they come in handy. A lot of things I learned in Brazil was like that. I didn't care about the best place to get bananas on a Wednesday ever till that Wednesday when I needed bananas, and I knew exactly where to go just from having had someone tell me, and I'd be like, oh yeah, cool, interesting, yeah, amazing. But then it comes in handy later. So, there are a lot of things like that can really help you. And you might not even be someone who wants to necessarily get involved in the Brazilian culture. You might just be coming out here on holiday, but then just knowing about certain things might just save you some time, save you some questions. How can I get tickets to the Sambródromo at the Maracanã during Carnival? Well, listen, if you go across Copacabana, you will find at least 5 or 6 people within 15 minutes who are selling those tickets. Not to mention, if you go to the Maracanã and just hang out outside, you will find people that are selling legit tickets. A lot of people do that. They make that their income when it comes to Carnival. So you don't necessarily have to go online and check if there are spaces, and you will be able to get tickets for the exact same price, or maybe pay 20 reais more. These things here probably going to be interesting to you when that experience comes around. The same for Rock in Rio, which is a festival that happens every 2 years. There are ways to get tickets for these things. There are ways to participate in stuff that you might not necessarily know if you just go through a sort of linear way of looking online at the official website and stuff like that. Not saying that, and these things aren't illegal, by the way. Not telling you stuff that is illegal. Stuff that is pretty legit, just different to maybe the amount of red tape that you might have in other parts of the world. That being said, there's a lot of red tape here as well. Don't get it twisted. If you are someone who's trying to live out here, you will experience a lot of red tape. Not saying that it's completely impossible or really, really, really difficult. It's just there are red tapes. And when I first came out here, it was to be someone who was going to stay for a few months. And when I moved to Rio, because I didn't originally live in Rio, but when I moved to Rio, I was staying at this Airbnb, and the son of the person who was renting out the Airbnb, he said to me, oh yeah, the moment you start understanding politics is the moment you arrived in Brazil. And I was like, well, you know, I'm not interested in politics, so I probably will never arrive then, that's cool. But then I remember a few months later, or a few weeks later, whatever it was, they changed the visa laws. They changed government along with the visa laws, and I was like, shit, now I need to start making some moves, and I need to blah 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 and all this stuff that you have to do. And yeah, having learned about that, I did actually feel like I had arrived. He was right. So, you know, some things are unavoidable whilst you're out here, because governments do change, laws change with that, and they hope that they go back, or they might go back. And current political climate is what it is, and a lot of people know who the president is right now because he's quite a major figure in terms of controversy and stuff like that. But anyway, moving on. This is why this is important. This is why it's important to have, again. So I'm going to leave it on that for this week, and just say that if you, again, I think I set homework in the last episode, which was, alright, so on the last episode, on the last podcast, I asked you, the communidade, to get involved. And I'm going to just reiterate what I said last time. So the assignment is, if you are someone who has not been to this side of the world, if you've not been to Brazil, what is something that you'd like to know before you get out here? Comment, write in. We will answer your question in the next episode. If you are someone who has already been here, what is something that you wish you had known before you got out here? Again, write in, let us know, make comments, share with our communidade. And for my Brazilians, what is something that you wish us gringos, us foreigners, whatever you want to call us, had known before we came out here? Okay? So these three things, you know, same kind of question, just depending on the perspective of who. So let's talk about that in the next coming episodes. And that being said, so yeah, that's about it for episode 2. Why we are making this podcast, why it's important for you to be part of our communidade. This is a team effort, so it's important for you to make sure you like, subscribe, share, comment, get involved. So from me, obrigado, até logo, thank you, see you soon, peace.